It is Wednesday, February 22nd, 2017. I'm Gord Long. As is normally the case, I have a lot of charts for us to go through this morning, so therefore I'll pass over some of them quickly, but leave you to examine them further at your leisure. You'll need to open your viewer to full screen viewing, or you'll not be able to see some of the detail I'll be discussing in the charts. A reminder before we begin. Do not trade from any of these slides. They are for educational and discussion purposes only. The purpose of the audio is to discuss key developments in those areas not specifically updated in this month's macro online updates. The research document this month updates macroeconomic developments. Therefore, the slides this morning will focus on our other three report areas of our monthly report, the global risk, regional, and U.S. developments. As I often do, I'd like to tie them together into a discussion. Last month, we said we would continue with our expectations of Trumponomics and address one, where we see Trumponomic investment winners and losers to be, why Trumponomics may potentially fail, and thirdly, what the post-Trump inauguration first half roadmap is shaping up to look like. The winners and losers we are watching closely as part of our strategic investment insights are shown here. The specific investment instruments we are focused on in the areas of infrastructure, defense, and what we call security surveillance can be found on the SII subscriber site pages specifically. We feel fairly comfortable in our expectations within the areas of infrastructure, defense, and security surveillance, at this point at least. The others will take more clarity from the Trump administration and the Republican-controlled Congress during Q1 and Q2. As far as infrastructure goes, President Trump's instincts are right on the money when he says that he wants to spend $1 trillion on infrastructure. Without a doubt, we desperately need it. If you look at the issues associated, I could spend 30 minutes on why this is required across the United States, but suffices to say it's money that should have been spent if we had it. The need is there. The problem is we are flat broke. We are $20 trillion in debt, minimally, and we are adding more than $1 trillion to that total every year without another trillion in infrastructure expenditures. So where are we going to get the money? That is a critically important investment question that needs to be answered. Expect details of the spending, funding, and projects to emerge in Trump's second 100 days with the congressional spring budget, at least according to Speaker Paul Ryan, who's giving us these expectations. Trump has called for massive transportation investments, with proposals ranging from $500 to that $1 trillion number I gave you. But a final package could end up being far smaller than those initial figures. The plan currently calls for PPP, which is public-private partnership funding, based on the idea of offering financial incentives to private companies that want to back transportation projects. Firms would bid on a project, build and maintain it for a set amount of time, and recover costs through tolls or set payments from the state or the local government. The problem here is the payback time on the project based on expected revenue flows. And to quote House Speaker Paul Ryan, we're trying to do our best to streamline regulations so that transportation dollars stretch as far as possible, and leveraging private sector dollars so that private sector money can be part of the solution instead of always thinking this is a government-only requirement. One proposal that Trump has floated would provide $137 billion in federal tax credits to companies that finance transportation projects, which he claims would unlock $1 trillion in investment over 10 years. Incoming Transportation Secretary Elaine Choi signaled in her confirmation hearing, at least that's what I heard, that the incoming administration may also be supportive of some direct federal spending on transportation. This is what the Democratic Party is proposing. Trump has called for cutting the regulatory red tape that can slow down transportation projects, the same as Paul Ryan's alluding to. And to quote Elaine Choi, one of the major complaints is how long it takes for projects to be ready for bidding. So the issue is not only how to fund infrastructure projects, but how to increase the pipeline of available projects. Trump has pledged to follow two simple rules when he is in office: buy American and hire American. Lawmakers are expecting Trump's infrastructure proposal to be held to the same standard. The problem may be in the continued delays already witnessed with Trump's cabinet nominees, getting any kind of congressional approval on a timely basis. Democrats are clearly slow-rolling everything that Trump proposes. Trump's chief of staff, Reince Priebus, has stated publicly that Obamacare repeal and replace and a new tax bill will take precedent over infrastructure. Those need to be solved first, at least that's what their current thinking is, before we get to the infrastructure monies being allocated. And this is important in the timing of infrastructure, because right now we've already seen an expansion on PEs in anticipation. Will there be a correction before we actually get the approval and get the lift? So the Obamacare repeal and the tax bill, those two alone, without regulatory rollback being a core requirement of PP funding success, could take much, much longer than currently expected by investors. I think it's important to understand the philosophical minefield that lays ahead with getting an infrastructure bill actually to President Trump's desk. There are distinct and critical differences between the liberal economic stimulus spending package promoted by Presidents Bill Clinton in 1993 and President Barack Obama in 2009 and President-elect Trump's plan to rebuild America's infrastructure. For economic conservatives and free market champions, Mr. Trump's proposal appears vastly preferable to those of his Democratic predecessors. The Clinton presidency is recognized as a time when the economy grew and the stock market soared, but not necessarily by design of the president. Mr. Clinton's core proposal to get American economy back on its feet after the recession of early 1990s was a $16.3 billion economic stimulus bill. The massive spending package was a grab bag of government spending projects, including public works expenditures, extended unemployment benefits, funding for mass transport, and money for even summer jobs programs. The design of the bill, coupled with a proposed $2.5 billion increase in block grants to cities, allowed the GOP opponents to label the package as a political giveaway to liberal big city mayors, and it was. The bill was defeated in Congress and never became law. There's a lot of this legacy that we need to appreciate before we just assume this is going straight through legislation. President Obama likewise proposed an increase in government spending, this time close to some $1 trillion, including a combination of tax cuts, government benefits, and loans. The president demanded the bill as a way of saving or creating nearly 2.3 million jobs. The bill passed into law, but the Congressional Budget Office noted the package came nowhere near creating the number of jobs the president claimed. Critics on the left said the president erred by not seeking a larger spending package, while those on the right noted the increased government spending did not create any jobs or prosperity. Now comes the stimulus plan that we're concerned about with Donald Trump, who has long been noted a critic of spending abroad while ignoring American infrastructure. Mr. Trump has called LaGuardia Airport and other large American airports as third world. Trump's key advisor, Steve Bannon, has hailed rebuilding America's failing infrastructure as part of an economic nationalist agenda, arguing that if America is to ever rebuild, the time is now when interest rates are at zero or close to it. Conservatives, suspect of most government spending programs like Clinton and Obama's stimulus package, view the Trump proposal with suspicion. They shouldn't. Clinton and Obama's spending proposals were marred by Keynesian belief that government spending would magically create jobs. Trump's proposal is different. A critical component of Trump's plan is private investment. Libertarian economist Bob Poole of the Reason Foundation has watched the developments of Trump's proposal with optimism. Poole believes that Trump's plan will treat infrastructure as a public utility. People get their highway bill every month like they get their electric bill and water bill. That's how he looks at it. They're paying for what they use and only what they use. They're not subsidizing a whole bunch of other projects that they never see. Michael Sargent argued this sentiment in the Heritage Foundation paper titled Building on Victory and an Infrastructure Agenda for the New Administration. He believes that the current process of federally funding the airports is woefully efficient. Instead, he notes airport funding should be localized by eliminating the burdensome airport improvement program and its related taxes while empowering airports to generate and spend their own revenues through airport user fees. This is a conservative idea that departs from liberal tax and spend policies of the past. Clearly, there's no free lunch, but we need to fully appreciate we're talking about user fees and public utilities and tolls, etc. for this to go through. This is going to be a philosophical bun fight, though both on the service support infrastructure. So just to say they both support infrastructure, you can see what's still in front of us. This means potential delays and of course, what kind of bill will actually come out the other side. The biggest difference between Trump's stimulus and those of his liberal predecessors is the intent. President Trump is trying to repair infrastructure to make America great again, not to create shovel-ready jobs like some Keynesian fantasy. When stimulus money is spent for the purpose of increasing government spending to generate a government bubble of economic activity, it is destined to become a quick failure that saddles the country with long-term debt. However, when the purpose of the money is to build an infrastructure through the private sector, financed almost entirely through tax breaks, then it's another story. The Trump stimulus marks a pivot from bureaucracies towards transactions. Private companies will not only independently pay for and build the internal improvements, but also own them. The personal ownership and equity stakes of these institutions will ensure they are always well maintained and profitable. At least that's the theory. Unlike the Clinton and Obama stimulus plans, the Trump plan will not cost taxpayers money. That's the plan. With its $165 billion raised from private investment, the cost of the plan will be entirely offset by new revenue generated from the economic stimulus. By mixing the conservative pillars of privatization and property rights with the liberal rallying cry of social infrastructure, Trump has created a policy that members on both sides of the aisle should be able to get behind in theory. In truth, it is the epitome of bipartisanship and should be embraced immediately, but I'm highly skeptical because of the points I've just laid out. There's a major philosophical difference of opinion on how these things will be paid for, and you can expect a bun fight and for it to be delayed in the process, just like Obamacare. Let's switch to the other big stimulus area of stimulus spending, defense. President Donald Trump signed an executive order on January 27th to launch what he called a great rebuilding of the armed forces, which is expected to include new ships and planes, additional special operation forces, the modernization of the U.S. nuclear arsenal, and the cutting of projects that are not considered the highest priority operations, whatever they are. The order called for new Defense Secretary Jim Mattis to carry out a 30-day readiness review that would examine, 1, needs for the war against the Islamic State and other forms of Islamic terror, 2, the training, maintenance, ammunition, and infrastructure for such a plan, and 3, the review will also examine how to carry out operations against unnamed near-peer competitors, a group which U.S. officials typically identify as China and Russia. The order also calls for a second parallel review in which the Pentagon and the Office of Management and Budgets, OMB, combine to craft a military readiness emergency budget amendment that would boost military spending this year, and for Mattis to revise the Pentagon's tentative budget proposal for 2018 within 90 days. Mattis also is charged with creating a new national security strategy by next January 2018 that, 1, explicitly builds up the military, and 2, has special emphasis that would be placed on modernizing nuclear weapons, strengthening missile defense, addressing delays in the maintenance of existing equipment, and overcoming shortfalls in the areas where more people are needed, such as cyber war, personal recovery, and expeditionary naval forces. The training and equipping of some units was significantly altered by the congressional mandated budget cuts known as sequestration. That went into effect in 2013, which Trump is violently opposed to and, matter of fact, will change. Trump's proposals for the military during his presidential campaign were drawn heavily from the Conservative Heritage Foundation and could cost between $55 and $90 billion per year, according to outside experts. The plan includes adding tens of thousands of soldiers until the service reaches about 540,000 troops, expanding the Navy's fleet to have at least 350 ships. There were 316 ships in 2001, but the numbers dropped to 278 under President George W. Bush as the United States fought prolonged wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Pentagon began investing in more ships under Obama and former Navy Secretary Ray Mappas, but is expected to hit the goal of 308 by 2021 only. Adding about 100 Air Force fighters or attack jets until the service reaches 1,200 is also in the plan, and increasing the number of Marine Corps infantry battalions from 24 to 36, which would include thousands of Marines also. Whether all of this will get through Congress is obviously a big issue because of increased spending, and we have a lot of Republican fiscal conservative hawks. The point I'd make here additionally is I think it'll happen, but when and how long will this drag out, and what kind of delays we'll see before the money actually starts to flow, and these stocks that are already moving on anticipation will be justified. There could be delays and corrections involved in here. Thirdly is security surveillance. We know that Trump was emphatic during the presidential campaign about keeping America safe, which involves policing and homeland security capabilities being elevated. We have yet to see exactly what form the policies and budgeting will take, but we can be pretty assured that elements of cybersecurity and broadened electronic surveillance will be implemented. We see the emergence of an even larger security surveillance complex versus the military-industrial complex actually rapidly coming to America. And I think this is going to be a major investment area. It already has been, but will gain more and more dominance over the next 3 to 4 years, in my mind. When we look at auto, retail, and pharmaceuticals, we can expect pressures on healthcare costs to show itself in the big pharma industry. We're already seeing major cracks in the auto and retail industries, which we've written about separately. And at some point in late 2017 or in 2018, we may see the Trump administration forced to take actions to support car makers and the retail industries. We see massive problems there, actually. In the other areas, we just can't be certain yet, and time will tell, and we'll see more about that, I think, as in Q2 and maybe Q3. Let me be very clear that I truly applaud a lot of what Trump is doing. I'm not necessarily a supporter of Trump personally, but certainly his policies are pro-business, pro-growth. But it shows how poorly the American people have actually been served by prior administrations, whether Democratic or Republican, frankly going all the way back to Ronald Reagan. However, I'm likely more pragmatic than a lot of newbies, having seen this theater many times before. Before I get into 5 specific concerns with the direction of Trumponomics, let me first make 5 general observations. Superlatives get the order, but the installation is then hell. Trump is making a rookie mistake. He has and continues to overcommit without a full grasp of the realities of working with Congress, the media, Washington bureaucracy, and a whole new administration. Even if he can deliver on the huge list of campaign trust me's, his ability to deliver in a timely manner that matches the high expectations he has set for his administration could be a very serious issue. Trump employs way too many superlatives in his dialogues, which may be helpful in selling his real estate projects, but are not useful in setting reasonable expectations what can be achieved. There is little room for contingencies and unforeseen difficulties. The second issue is the situational reality. He is an unproven captain and an unproven crew in a leaking boat, and I see a hurricane on the horizon. Trump would have been better served if he had a clearer picture of the degree of mess he is inheriting. He is quickly learning how bad it is, but still doesn't understand the full magnitude. For example, he thinks the deficit's $20 trillion. With unfunded liabilities, it's actually $84 trillion. And this number is now no longer in the future, as 10,000 baby boomers retire every day and over 70 million still to come. Additionally, when you add in contingent liabilities of $220 trillion, that's known as the fiscal gap, he needs to appreciate that even a minor U.S. recession or global slowdown, which is occurring, will expose him to at least $10 trillion of those contingent liabilities U.S. government's on the hook for. Think of Puerto Rico most recently. I view Captain Trump as a new captain with a new untested crew in a very leaky boat facing a level 5 hurricane that he has yet to fully be warned of. Third, populist rhetoric plays well, but is not the answer. We have populist solutions for the wrong era. This is not the Reagan era. Lower taxes, fiscal spending on infrastructure and defense, and reduced regulations played well for Ronald Reagan, and I applaud them. And they play well to many today. Unfortunately, it isn't sufficient today, or even necessarily correct. We will talk about that further in a moment. Trump's personality is another concern. Trump's best times may be over by the summer. Crowd adulation will quickly wane as he walks off to Florida and goes back to where he feels safe with these Trump rallies. Trump's personality is actually getting in the way of critically succeeding in uniting a severely fractured nation. His State of the Union, which was described by many as at both home and abroad, was a declaration of war, along with his all-out attack on the media by labeling them the enemy of the people. He has almost guaranteed that his administration will now face nothing but unending erection of walls being put in place to stop everything and anything he attempts. 5, he has forgotten that he needs to drain the swamp first. Trump, by jumping in so quickly with a bevy of executive orders and policy initiatives, seems to have forgotten that he needs to drain the swamp first. As a former manager of mine once told me, it's hard to remember you're here to drain the swamp when you're up to your neck in alligators. What I see is he has antagonized Washington before his administration could even begin to seek out the liberal loyalists and dysfunctional bureaucrats that are currently causing him the problem. The highly visible firing of National Security Director General Flynn was the first of what promises to be many examples of internal sabotage of the Trump administration's policy initiatives. Though the gap between expectations and enthusiasm and reality is large and seems to be growing by the day, there is also a strong chance that the market may not care until the end of the summer, i.e. investors may give the White House the benefit of the doubt until maybe August or September at the best. And 2, the tape may not really need material action from Washington. The nominal growth improvements predated November 8th by several months, and the present economic earnings trend can persist. The SPX could be able to do $135 to $137 per share by 2018 without any of Trump's or Ryan's big 3 initiatives. We'll see. I'm skeptical, but that's a possibility. Trumponomics does not change my view on the trajectory of the economy for the next 4 to 6 quarters. That's the bottom line. Markets are repricing because of the public narrative that lower taxes, less regulation, and higher deficit spending will provide a positive demand shock, followed by a surge in inflation. I disagree with the assumptions undermining this Wall Street-driven thesis, or what I recently described as Wall Street's witch's brew. Here are 5 of the reasons why I suspect Trump's policy initiatives will actually fall short. And again, I want to be supportive of Trump because he's doing the right kinds of things, but his actual specific initiatives are flawed. Let's start with Trump's tax plan. The most potentially dynamic component of the Trump plan is the reduction in tax rates. The plan calls for a $500 billion decrease in taxes over the next 10 years. With a tax multiplier of -2, there would be a lift in economic growth of $1 trillion over the next 10 years for an economy that is on a growth path of about $5 trillion over that same time frame. As such, the annual growth could be boosted by $500 billion a year to $600 billion. This stimulus will take a considerable amount of time to work through the economy, and the positive contribution required that monetary conditions remain favorable, not adversarial. So it's not the tax plan. It's really about the timing and what he's facing here. The Reagan tax cuts of the early 1980s are quite instructive on this point. The tax cut was far larger in relative terms than what is being proposed by Trump, and since the federal debt was so much less than it is currently, the tax multiplier was more negative, approximately -3. Additionally, the Reagan tax cuts were being implemented while interest rates were falling sharply. Even with the fiscal and monetary conditions working in tandem, the economy was very slow to respond. The Republicans lost control of the U.S. Senate in the 1984 congressional elections, and their numbers in the House were reduced. Also, Fed Chairman Volcker was required to orchestrate a major decline in the dollar under the Plaza Accord, and interest rates did not reach their cyclical low until 1986. Goldman is now on record as giving 3 reasons why they have soured substantially in just the last few months. First, the recent difficulty congressional Republicans have had in moving forward on Obamacare repeal does not bode well for reaching a quick agreement on tax reform or infrastructure funding, and reinforces, to quote them, their view that a fiscal boost, if it happens, is mostly 2018. I think they're more negative than I am here. Second, while bipartisan cooperation looked possible on some issues following the election, the political environment appears to be as polarized as ever, suggesting that issues that require bipartisan support may be difficult to address. And third, some of the recent administrative actions by the Trump administration serve as a reminder that the president is likely to follow through on many of his campaign promises, a long list, I might add. Secondly, initial conditions, which is an economics term for all the other factors that influence economic growth, are negative and have become more negative recently. The economy is extremely over-indebted, turning even more so this year. In the latest statistical year, debt of the 4 main domestic non-financial sectors increased by $2.2 trillion, while GDP gained only $450 billion. Debt of these 4 sectors, that is household, business, federal, and state, surged to a new high relative to GDP. This will serve as a restraint on growth for years to come. This means that pent-up demand for virtually all big-ticket items is exhausted. Apartments, single-family homes, new vehicles, plant and equipment. Housing. The residential housing market appears to have topped out even before the sharp recent advance in mortgage yields, which will further create downward pressure on this market. Rents are falling as a result of massive apartment construction boom. It's unbelievable here in Massachusetts. Auto sales, vehicle sales for the first 10 months of this year have fallen slightly below last year's sales pace, with new and used prices now being down 1.2% over the past year or larger, and auto inventories. The auto market appears saturated, reflected by a huge stock of new vehicles and significant easing of credit standards. Third, the recent rise in market interest rates will place downward pressure on the velocity of money and also the rate of growth in money supply. This is not a powerful effect, but it is a negative one. Some of the additional savings or less spending will occur, thus giving the velocity a push downward. So in effect, the markets have tightened monetary conditions without the Fed acting. If the Fed raises rates again, this will place some additional downward pressures on both M and V in the equation on GDP, and hence on nominal GDP. Thus, the markets have reduced the timeliness and potential success of the coming tax reductions. Another negative initial condition is that the dollar has risen this year, currently trading close to 13-year highs. The highly relevant Chinese yuan is slumped to a 7-year low. These events will force disinflationary, if not deflationary, forces into the U.S. economy. Corporate profits, which have already fallen back to 2011, will be reduced due to several considerations. Sales are down, even though through financial engineering, we keep pushing up stock earnings per share, sort of. Pricing power will be reduced. Domestic and international market share will be lost, and profit of overseas subs will be reduced by currency conversion. Corporate profits on overseas operations will be reduced, but with demand weak and current profits under downward pressure, the repatriated earnings are likely to go into financial rather than physical investment. The psychological reaction to Trump's unexpected victory, along with the worsening initial conditions, means that the upcoming tax package may do little more than contain the additional negative momentum developing within the economy. Additional deficit spending for infrastructure also carries a negative multiplier. This is confirmed by recent scholarly research. Let's say, for the purpose of argument, that the multiplier is a small positive. It will take a long time to develop the preliminary engineering and design work to identify the projects, and even longer to hire the contractors. So even if the multiplier were negative, the benefits seem to be well into the future. Markets have a pronounced tendency to rush to judgment when policy changes occur. When the Obama stimulus of 2009 was announced, the presumption was that it would lead to an inflationary boom. Similarly, the unveiling of QE1 raised expectations of runaway inflation. Yet, neither happened. The economics are not different. Under present conditions, it's my judgment that the declining secular trend in Treasury bond yield remains intact. We are only now beginning the second stage of the Trump trade, that is, deal-making. High expectations are now going to face the reality of getting the House and Senate to improve the Trump administration's fiscal and policy agenda. And clearly you can see, I believe this is going to be a much, much bigger problem than is currently perceived. It can be assured that what we witness regarding the stalling tactics of approving Trump's cabinet nominations is only the very beginnings of what will be an increasingly contentious situation. The administration has stated that Obamacare repeal and replace, along with a major new tax bill, are the first orders of business for Congress. In my opinion, this is going to be a major battle even within Republican House and Senate members. Both need to be in place before we can get to infrastructure and defense spending budgets, which can be approved for the new spring budget. Why, for example, are Republicans finding it so difficult to repeal and replace Obamacare? Some cite general dysfunction within the Trump administration or fundamental differences of opinion between Trump's policy advisors and economic experts. We're going to go well into Q3 before there is any chance of these getting through Congress. Implementation is maybe a second half 2017 possibility, with impact being out into 2018. We have posted endless analytics indicating that a U.S. recession in late 2017 is a real possibility. This can only disrupt and complicate matters more. Nothing is being done or even considered regarding this very real possibility. Unfortunately, the markets have already priced in the new assumed tax plans. Delays are not going to be received well by the markets. During the Reagan administration, there was a major sell-off after the tax plan was finally implemented. That may be good news since we are already pricing it in and we haven't seen it yet, nor realistically know when it will take effect. So the sell-off may be still a long ways out. We have confusion ahead in Q2 2017, but optimism will hopefully prevail, and we can get another lift before the Trump trade finally ends, probably with a thud. We'll see how all of this unfolds, but in closing, remember the answer will be they'll print the money, they'll print more money. It is the only answer politicians will ever agree on. Invest accordingly. I'd like to take a moment as a reminder, do not trade from any of these slides. They are for educational and discussion purposes only. As negative as these comments often are, there has seldom been a better time for investing. However, it requires careful analysis and not following what has traditionally been true and tried approaches. Do your own reading and make sure you have a knowledgeable and well-informed financial advisor. So until we talk again, may 2017 turn out to be an outstanding investment year for you and your family. Thank you for listening.